Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's masterclass. I'm Hans Engel from the Directors Guild of Canada. Amazing to see so many of you here. We've got currently 108 people in attendance, so thank you very, very much. Welcome to DGC Masterclass 2021, where we celebrate some of the most important filmmakers of our time, both Canadian and international. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional Indigenous lands that we all live and gather on today. Although this event is online and takes place at many locations, we each enjoy the privilege of living and working within an Indigenous territory. And as a gesture of appreciation for our use of these lands, we ask that you join us in acknowledging the people who have lived and thrived in these regions across the continent for tens of thousands of years. We're extremely fortunate to have renowned DGC director Tim Southam as our moderator tonight. And in fact, Tim, 2 years ago, in early April of 2020, was our very first moderator for these virtual masterclasses that we've been doing ever since. And that was a session with the late, very missed, great Jean-Marc Vallée. Tim is brilliant, and we're really lucky to have him here. Tim's work includes series like American Gods, for which he won a DGC award, Bates Motel, Lost in Space, Animal Kingdom, as well as indie features, miniseries, and award-winning films for television. He served as the producing director on Lock and Key, Colony, Bates Motel, and Cracked, for which he also directed the pilot. Our featured directors tonight are Jeremy Podeswa and Helen Shaver, two of the greatest television directors of our time. Helen Shaver has built a lasting legacy, both behind and in front of the camera. She's directed hundreds of hours of television, including shows like Vikings, Snowpiercer, Westworld, Orphan Black, to name only a very, very few, and has received multiple Emmy and Saturn Award nominations, among many other honors. Jeremy Podeswa's career began with early accolades for his feature films Fugitive Pieces, Five Senses, and Eclipse. He's gone on to be one of the most sought-after television directors, working on and being nominated for Emmys for many of the biggest shows, including Game of Thrones, Boardwalk Empire, 6 Feet Under, True Detective, Handmaid's Tale, Homeland, Ray Donovan, Mosquito Coast, to name only a few. Jeremy was both a director and executive producer on Station 11. An amazing lineup for you tonight. It is my absolute honor to welcome Jeremy Podeswa, Helen Shaver, and Tim Southam. Please come on in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Gotta have a bit of applause for you.
That's very clever.
Now, before I turn it over to you guys, I want to point out to those watching, now 127 strong, the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Please, if you have questions, type your questions into the Q&A button. Tim will be watching that, and he will try to get to as many of them as he can. He probably won't be able to get to all of them. There's a lot to talk about, but he will certainly try. Also, if there's anybody who doesn't know, who isn't familiar with Zoom, top right-hand corner, the view button, you can change how you see what you're going to be watching. So check that out too. That's it for me. Guys, thank you so much for doing this. I'm really looking forward to this. Over to you.
Thanks, Hans. And thank you, Ryan Tonelli, the secret weapon of all of these seminars. And congrats, Hans, for all the work you've been doing, since well before the pandemic, but you've been really a sustaining force, and these events have been such a sustaining force during our very interesting slam dance with this new era. And what a show to be talking about with Jeremy and Helen. Welcome, both of you, and it's such a thrill to be speaking with you. Congratulations on somehow catching one of the most sort of curious waves in our generation's history, which is making a show about a pandemic in a pandemic. We dream of sort of hooking up with the zeitgeist as artists, and you really did here. And I wonder if I could, ask you, how it felt to get a call to do this. Of course, these calls all came in before COVID-19 hit North America. So I wonder if, Jeremy, you could sort of situate us, and then Helen sort of give us some sense of how you responded when you received a call to take a look at this beautiful adaptation.
I guess I got the call first. When I first got involved in this project, I was called in to meet with Patrick Somerville, who's the creator of the show, and Hiro Murai, who is the director of episode 1 and 3, and also an executive producer on the show. And it was well before the pandemic, and there was no inkling of anything that could possibly happen. So it was, for me, it was an adaptation of this beautiful novel by Emily St. John Mandel, a beautiful adaptation by Patrick Somerville, a fascinating story about many things that interested me thematically. The connection to what we were going through was much more tangential. Like, it was, there were references to like SARS and other things, Zika virus, things like that had happened before, but it was never something as close or as monumental as what we've experienced since. So, it was a much more, artistically based, not sort of about our moment, discussion, other than the themes, which are, what makes life worth living, and what is the role of relationships in our lives, and art, and the creation of art, and what things endure over time, and all those kind of things, which are sort of like, they're applicable anytime, really. Those are the things that we really talked about. When we started to make the show, Hiro directed first episode 1 and 3 that were shot before the pandemic. And then just when 3 was completed, and when I was about to take over and start the next 8 episodes as a producer and to direct 3 episodes, the pandemic hit. And suddenly we were in a situation where life was imitating art, recent art that we had created, and the world was changing, and the show got shut down. And then the next months were really about how, where, when could we possibly resurrect this show? How could we put it back together? Where might it happen? When would it be possible to do it safely? All those things became the crucial questions. And eventually the show got up many months later and moved from Chicago, its original location, to Toronto. And that's when Helen became involved, when we were putting it back together for the next phase. And it was, we wanted 2 other directors to be involved in the show, and Helen was somebody we wanted very badly to be involved.
So the show returns to its birthplace, really, because Toronto figures explicitly in the novel as the location. And Helen, you're Canadian, but you had to get yourself back to Canada to do this. So
no, not at all. My forever house is on Vancouver Island. I was there. I'd handed in my cut of Lovecraft Country on February 14th, just before the pandemic started and the shutdown started. And so I was planning to take the summer off because I'd worked back to back anyway. And so the summer went by, and it was in the fall. Jeremy and I did a masterclass together. He was in your role, and I was talking. He dropped a whisper in my ear about it. I said, well, that sounds pretty interesting. I was very happy since I was unvaccinated and approaching my 70th birthday to be in my beautiful home on the seaside, and was not looking to rush out. At the same time, Maid was approaching me, and anyway, one thing and another. It took me, Patrick. I saw material, the normal thing. Patrick and I met on Zoom, just on a one-on-one meeting, and there was an intuitive, empathic. Patrick is so much fun. He has a playful imagination. He is curious. He's interested in to hear, and he can hear. And so this dialogue began to happen that was exciting. And as I delved into the material, I found that deeply attractive. It spoke to many things that mean a lot to me. And as well as the fact that, there is I know that we talk about no before, no after, but the truth is everything is now, which holds the past, which holds the future. And that's what I know about life, is that everything is now, which does not mean there is no before. It just means that before is also happening now, and after is also happening now, because there ain't anything else. And so it took me I wanted to say no. I was scared. I was scared to come out. I was unvaccinated. I was scared to come out in the middle of things. And it was finally after I'd shot my first day on Maid that I came back to the hotel, and I sort of flopped down in the bed, took my mask off and breathed deeply and went, yes, I will choose trust over fear. And a switch happened in my head. I called Patrick and I said yes. And then off I went. And then what was fascinating to me, because all my work, well, I had things that took place in year one or before the flu, wonderful scenes that took place with David and Gael and so on. And then I had wonderful scenes with young Kirsten in year two. But by and large, my work was in year 20. And so at that time, Toronto was in a complete lockdown. Actors were coming in and having to quarantine for 2 weeks. No spouses, no children, et cetera, et cetera. And so what was remarkable, and I wasn't really conscious of it at the time, but I really find it is embedded in the no acting required, because it was the truth, is that collectively we were all going through a traumatic experience, not just of the pandemic, but going home each day to isolation. And so it was when we came to the set that life happened. And part of that life was the making of something together. And I think that really enriched all the post-pandemic performances, because no acting.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's true. And actually, Jeremy, maybe we can build on that by showing what folks, I think what we're going to try to do is show a number of clips, and also, get you to bed on time. But there is a strong sense of community in the year 20 environment. As you know, the two major time frames are sort of as it happens, and then 20 years later. But of course, this being a mini series, we have the incredible opportunity of telling the story iteratively and in a very kind of prismatic way over 10 episodes, really starting in a very structurally very fragmented way, and sort of funneling characters toward one another for a resolution in episode 10. And it is almost jarring to go from episode 1, where things are happening and it seems like a linear adventure story about a pandemic, about an emerging disaster, and suddenly cut to what appears to be a very bucolic, a very sort of settled situation. And so, Jeremy, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that, either before or after we run the clip. And we would be running clip number 1 when that happens, Ryan.
Yeah, well, I'll just say one little thing, which is that there was a very conscious effort on all our parts that whatever this post-pandemic world looked like, it was not going to be like a traditional dystopian view of the future. And, even though it's a post-pandemic world, and even though there's been a great trauma and 9/10 of the world's population is now gone, the idea was that there were opportunities in this world, that some positive things came out of this big cataclysmic change. And, part of that has to do with the fact that once certain things are gone, like the internet and electricity and things that we think that we need to live, we now have to rely on things that we didn't know we had, that were always there. And they have to do with community and culture and art and nature. And those kind of things are really significant. And we forget how significant those things are and how really essential those things are, as opposed to the things that we think are essential, but actually could be removed from our lives and we could still go on and have very full lives. So this idea of the future as almost like this Arcadian, natural world was really something that was very, very conscious for us to create, and very much in opposition to what that world is often depicted as. So episode 2 is the beginning of that, of seeing what does this post-pandemic world look like. And it was important to us that it was a vivid, colorful, rich, dynamic, exciting, interesting world to enter, and not what you might expect.
So I guess we'll find ourselves with Dylan Taylor, but the entire community of the Traveling Symphony. So are you happy? Shall we roll the clip?
Mm-hmm.
Come on, Dan. 5th time's the charm. You got this.
Good morning.
Good morning.
In less than an hour, an aircraft from here will join others from around the world. Perhaps it's fate that today is the 4th of July, and you will once again be fighting for our freedom. Not from tyranny, oppression, or persecution, but from annihilation. We're fighting for our right to live, to exist. And should we win the day, the 4th of July will no longer be known as an American holiday, but as the day when the world declared in one voice, we will not go quietly into the night.
No.
We will not vanish without a fight.
Yeah.
We're going to live on.
Yeah.
We're going to survive.
Yeah.
Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.
Come on.
So?
Yeah, man, let's make magic.
I got the job. I'm in the Traveling Symphony. Are you serious? I'm in? Oh my God, thank you. Seriously.
Welcome to the family.
Oh, yes! 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 Yes!
It's my 20th symphony. Oh,
Okay.
you finish?
Such a great.
Awesome. We'll get Jeremy back.
Mm.
So world building in one flyover. Way to go.
Yeah.
Really beautiful job setting the entire world up.
And all in camera, no visual effects in that shot, is there?
No visual effects.
Ruth
So-
built that. We had an amazing production designer with yeah.
Yeah, spectacular job. I do want to say one thing about this that's I think really interesting, is that this episode 2 was the last episode that we shot, actually, and by that point Helen had really had basically established what year 20 was going to look and feel like. But I knew that the episode 2 was going to be the first time the audience was experiencing it. So it was very important to me that episode 2 feel like the first time we're meeting them. But we were blessed by the fact that by the time we shot this, those actors had worked together on 3 other episodes, and they were already gelling like a troupe and like a family. And so we had the great good fortune, like, not to have to start episode 2 for the audience with actors that didn't know each other, weren't familiar with each other. And that by this point, by the time we shot this, they were so much already like a company. And it was such a pleasure at that point. And I think you can really feel it in those little scenes, like in Dan's audition and everything that happens in episode 2. You just feel their intimacy, you feel their relationships, you feel their history. And that's just a great product of how the whole show happened to be scheduled. And it was largely scheduled because we needed summer. We needed the nicest possible weather that we could get to shoot episode 2, because it had to be the most lush of all the episodes. And so everything all worked out in a beautiful way.
That meant that when I came in, I had to start with 5 days prep. I had to jump in and do 7 days of shooting. The first day was the scene in the office in 4 where she refines her book and talks to David Cross, to the director, and then a day and a half of shooting the dinners, the big luncheon scene where there were 14 actors around a table, and these actors had never met each other, had never actually. I insisted that I get a couple of hours with them on the day before, where I could actually, like, they had never met each other. They'd all been in isolation, and we'd had one Zoom read through, which was the only read through ever done of the script. But it was just like, Patrick, we got to do this just so people can at least hear each other's voices and see their little thumbnail faces. And then we brought him in. I was like, okay. But
Helen was really thrown into it, into the deep end right away.
Yeah.
But she just, she did a masterful job of like just wrangling everything and everybody and making them feel good about what they were doing and establishing who those characters were really clearly and really quickly. And, and she continued to do that through the entire show. So by the time I got them in episode 2, it was just magic already at that point. They were all together.
Let's talk about it a little bit, because that clip therefore has really the DNA of both your work in it. And I have questions from Craig Burrows, Trish Dolman, and Zoe Hopkins about the building blocks, the actual. Let's talk a little bit about the horses and the cars and the costumes, and because you do spend more time than some shows, some dystopias, on some survival issues. How am I going to how am I going to eat? How am I going to sleep? How am I going to stay warm? And when will I have to move on, as opposed to merely where the bad guy is going to come from, or the zombies. So maybe we can dive in for just a second into your work separately, but then through some kind of coordinated process, which I'm going to guess is you, Jeremy, as the producing director, with your key crew to kind of build this 20 years after world.
Well, it was a huge consideration going into it, and we always knew that the year 20 was a whole new creation, and that we didn't want it to be like anything else, as I said before, that anybody had seen before. And as described in the novel, it does have a very specific kind of bucolic quality about it. But it's also, you were dealing with a reality where there hasn't been any manufacturing for 20 years. So there's nothing new that's created. Everything that exists is something that came from 20 years ago. So it's a scavenger culture. Everything's made out of things that are found. And so we knew that the Traveling Symphony, for example, would be all found things. So it's, they needed to get around on vehicles, but vehicles, there's no gas and there's no, nothing can move in the conventional way. So they have to be drawn by horses. And it's all like a matter of logic and thinking, like, how do you translate something into a post-pandemic world where certain things don't exist and other things do exist? And, Ruth Ammon and Helen Wong, who's the costume designer, Ruth Ammon is the production designer. We have many conversations and a huge amount of research and looking at things and discussing things and pictures and ideas and trying to create what this future world would be and what the symphony would be in particular. And it was a fantastic process of kind of narrowing it down to what it eventually became. And we were all very much of the same mind, and we had a very clear vision of what this should be. And Ruth and Helen really made it super concrete. And that's what was very exciting to see as it was coming together. But it was a huge effort. Just imagine just designing these cars that need to actually be practical and do things. And these cars turn into a stage when they're put into certain configuration. And when you bring walls down and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, what's the logic of all these things moving, and how much do they have to carry, and what has to be in each vehicle, and all these kind of things has to be figured out, and then it has to be built. So during the pandemic, we were Ruth was designing and finding ways to build these things that nothing comes off a rack. Like nothing in the show comes off a rack. Everything is custom made. Everything is bespoke. It's a gigantic effort to make this stuff in this time. But we had genius people everywhere, all over the show, in every department. Props, every prop is bespoke. Everything is handmade. And everything is discussed and considered and contemplated. For its, it's for uniqueness, for its what it brings to the entire show, how it builds the big picture, all those things. There was no small thing in the show. Everything was a thing.
Yes.
But it was beautifully done, and everybody was really. We had such beautiful craftspeople all over the show. It was a tribute to them all.
Yeah.
Well, and a shout out to also your hair and makeup team, the aging
Yes.
of Clark, of Miles, of Javine, of Gil, the aging work of Elizabeth. The aging work was just extraordinary. So the attention to detail is really so impressive.
Well, it's marvelous to work in an atmosphere where the audience is not considered dumb. It's not, we were never dumbing anything down or over explaining. Like, I think just, it was really approached with, as if you're talking to somebody who is totally your peer in the audience, as opposed to, well, we gotta tell them the thing.
Well, that's a fantastic opportunity, Helen, to sort of segue into really what I want to get at most, which is in your collaboration with Patrick, your incredible role as storytellers, because of the narrative, the fragmentation, both of the timelines, but also of the narrative, and how attentive you had to be to sort of the reassembly, or the sort of intentional reassembly of these of really these emotional timelines. I suppose in the world of making dystopias, one premise is you cut the power and wait 6 weeks and then people start killing each other. Here, of course, love seems to be a very present, and it's one of the things that has survived in this community. And it seems to be as strong as confrontation and discord, even to the point where Kirsten and the prophet developed this very odd relationship because, of course, the violence and the clear kind of streams of love that seem to be intermixed. So I'd like to show a clip that you directed, Helen, which shows a little bit just the interaction between timeframes. Which does not seem to be always cause and effect, does not always seem to be story, but often seems to be emotional. And so that would be clip number 5 from episode 106. And it follows a clip we'll show a little bit later, where Kirsten at 2 different ages is looking for Alex. So let's see if we can get that going, Ryan. think that's good. So walk us through it, Helen. How did, this is the opening sequence, so it could be mistaken for a teaser, but it certainly isn't, because this is a dominant motif of the show. The juxtaposition of characters, the same character in different eras, or just emotions that seem to be flowing between characters at different times. So I'd love to hear both of you on this.
Well, the end of 4, because there's an explosion.
We'll see it.
Yeah, so there's the explosion, and 4 ends there. And originally in the script, 6 was going to start with Kirsten waking up, you know, coming to in the demolished interior of the golf club. And for a number of reasons, production reasons, that was not going to be possible to do. And so it became like, okay, well, then how are we going to open 6? And Patrick and I were talking, and I was like, well, she's in shock, and she's looking for Alex. She's got to find Alex because Alex is ridden off on a horse, and she thinks that she's gone and maybe blown up and all of that stuff. And so that's what adult Kirsten is doing. And then we said, well, that would intercut then with this other scene that was going to be in 4. It kind of existed where young Kirsten is looking for Alex, and then there is the cuts from 9, which Jeremy shot, which are in the winter, those winter cuts Jeremy had shot, and where she is realizing that Jeevan has left, and so this whole thing of being left, of losing those you love, is so important to Kirsten, and so we began to talk about that, and I'd walked into that sort of curling club place and seen these rings on the floor, and I said, well, and circles are very important. The wheel, it's a symbol, a metaphor that runs through the whole piece. And I said, well, if we end up looking down on that, on baby Kirsten, then that will make a beautiful cut to looking up through a hole, which is a bomb hole where they've dug the mines out, to adult Kirsten. And so then we just started playing with that. And there is a scene that follows her when she finds Alex. There's a whole dialogue scene with David Cross, but just this looking for something that you can't find and you need so much, and looking for what is lost, looking for those you love. It was just, so that just all worked back and forth, and I made up this scene. And you know, we went into the room that the big arena that we shot that in. Ruth and I went in the morning, an hour before call, and there were all these golf clubs and golf carts, and we knew that we were going to create a maze for that. And Daniel Grant, my brilliant cinematographer, and Ruth and I stood in there and worked out where all of that stuff would go, and made a path for the little girl, and away we went. I mean, but this was part of the great joy of making this piece, was that it was an ongoing creative conversation with Patrick, with the actors, because they had many, many questions, and that drove it as well. Excuse me, not COVID.
Well, and I should get Jeremy to, because Jeremy, you directed a very beautifully, very full scene from Hamlet, where Kirsten's playing Hamlet in episode 2, which also uses time cuts very effectively to sort of paint Kirsten, to tell a big piece of Kirsten's story, which is the loss of her parents at the very outset of the flu. I wonder if you could sort of tell us your perspective on these time shifts and on the unique sort of almost intuitive, one senses from the structure of the show that there's a big plan for how to introduce the characters. Every episode has a mission and a mandate. It seems quite geometric in its sort of setup, but then very quickly it becomes extremely intuitive in ways which Helen's just described. Tell us how you and Patrick and the actors, I guess, but how you sort of worked your way into that level of associations.
Well, I think it starts with this whole idea of like the role of time in the show from the beginning through to the end. And it's something that was built into the show, but it continues to develop as the show is being edited. And there's this idea, because the show is dealing so much with the past and how we deal with the past, and specifically with trauma. And in Hamlet, Kirsten is processing her own trauma, and the kind of reverberations between what Hamlet's going through and what she went through as a child are, there's all these ideas of loss, losing your parents, how to get out of melancholy and trauma. These are things that Hamlet deals with. These are things that Kirsten deals with. And that is a thematic thing that runs through the show, but it's in the DNA of the show. It's not just literally in the narrative, it's also in what the show is actually doing. The show is, playing with time and with history and people's personal history as the trauma and the way we experience it, which is fractured often. And we process things in really complex ways, and we remember things in complex ways. And sometimes we forget things and they resurface at specific times in our lives when it's, there's something in us that needs to remember them. And so it's, the show in its formal qualities and its structure mimics this kind of body response to trauma in a way. And so much of how the language of the show developed was really about that. And how it evolved is very intuitive. It's not like we sat down and thought, okay, well, how are we going to represent trauma? And this is how we do it. It was really just, the show seamlessly wanted to kind of go back and forth in time and see the characters' past and how that affected their present, and see how their psyches evolved over time and why, and investigate all of those very very specific little granular things about each character that created who they were, and the people that we see as adults. So there's many things that get revealed over time about characters and what happened to them that impact things that we see in the show. And so Hamlet was just one example of that. Helen's scene that we just saw was another example of that, but it's layered all through the entire show. And
the show is really a poem, as opposed to right, because the subtext is really the story underneath the story is the story, right? The other stuff is there to help you hear the poetry and feel the emotion, as opposed to tell you what you should be feeling. It takes you there,
And
exactly.
there's also,
and it's very immersive. It's it has a quality of it seems like some of the cuts between a winter scene and a summer scene seems to have been motivated just by a feeling in a character that pops up in another character. And at one point I guess it's in episode 8, no, it must be actually in episode 4 in your episode, Helen, where Kirsten and Alex are having a fight, and it's intercut with a dispute between Jivan and Kirsten 20 years earlier in a completely different place. And the words are actually overlaid. There's a huge amount of prelapping and actual word replacement or overlap. So it's sort of incredibly, and these techniques keep evolving. There seems to be no rule. So actually, I wanted to move straight into something else, which is going to lead us to an important clip, a clip of great conflict that Helen also shot, so that we can get to Jeremy's a little later. Jeremy, in the Hamlet scene, you also introduce, or at least develop, the prophet. And the flu was the bad guy, I guess, up until then. We haven't met younger Tyler, who turns into the prophet in later episodes. But we meet this guy, this very enigmatic guy whom Kirsten does not trust almost immediately, and who is then really an antagonist in the classic sense. But for some reason, he's tolerated. His presence is tolerated. He isn't quite killed when he's stabbed. He's around, and yet there's this sort of almost mortal battle that develops between the traveling symphony, or at least Kirsten, and this guy, all held together unbeknownst to them by this graphic novel, which another character, Miranda, created before the pandemic. So I wonder if you could sort of tell us a little bit about the prophet, so that I can then go to the clip in episode 4, the piano scene that Helen shot.
Well, the prophet is a good example of the show where nothing is really binary in a way. It's like, this is not a show that's about black and white. This is a show about complexity and nuance and the opposite of whatever cliche is. And I think, in the book, was one of the more complicated things to translate from the book, because the character of the prophet is actually more of like a David Koresh kind of cult leader, a kind of more familiar kind of character that we've seen before. But it was important in the show that we make him a really complex character who has also trauma in his past. And so he's, his behavior and his, the whole story with him has to do with something that's almost analogous to what Kirsten has been through. They both as children, they're pre-pans, so they remember the world from before. They went through a horrible trauma, and now they're dealing with this traumatic new reality in the only way they can. And Kirsten goes one way and joins a theater company. He goes another way and starts this kind of strange little community of children that with a religion that's based on this graphic novel called Station 11. But in some ways, like, their tracks are kind of parallel. We understand that they both have suffered in the same way. They both have been through similar kinds of things. And so even though he does things that are really questionable, and he's not just like a black and white bad guy. He's a damaged person in a world full of damaged people. So I think that's what makes him a really fascinating character. And he's charismatic and he's compelling, to the audience and to Kirsten as well, even though she knows she should be afraid of him. There is something that draws her to him. And in fact, we discover that there's also something that's kind of cosmic in their connection too. They have a link that they don't really know at the beginning is there. But it's not just that they have a similar kind of trajectory. They actually have like literal history together that they weren't aware of. And that is a hugely bonding thing.
And somehow the encounter with the prophet motivates Kirsten to go looking for Station 11, the book, at Pingtree, which is a place that they know about, but which they don't go to because their traveling symphony doesn't leave the circle.
Right, because she believes that she has the only copy, and he's saying lines from it. And then so her first thought is, oh, he's stolen the book.
I have to find it.
I have to find the book, right? And which is, yeah. I mean, and it's so interesting, building on what Jeremy said, that, you take two individuals, and to me, I saw them as fraternal twins, which is why I chose in 6 to when they have their encounter that where things shift, that it would be in this little tiny glass wound.
That was fascinating choice.
I mean, that thing was like about, maybe it was 10 feet square, but it, so, and to put them in there. And so there they are, fraternal twins, raised separately, each given the same information regarding the book, but because of their damage, I remember damage, they interpret it in a different way. Kirsten, as she says in 8 to him, I was lucky. I met some people, some good people. They took care of me. He was with his mother, who was ignoring him because she was all involved in her own deal. He was in the airport where when he went to save a man who was not sick because he'd made it out of that place, they killed that man in front of him. So his need to get rid of before in order for him to survive is what sort of justifies his
and yet Helen, of course that backstory is revealed later. What we find ourselves facing in the clip that we're going to is this Kirsten in a race against time, in a sense, against this really terrible guy, right, toward this common prize, this book. the horror of the prophet is unalloyed at this point. It's not explained in any
No, it's
way by
not.
young Tyler's experience. And so in some sense, we're almost in a genre situation here, but magnificently original. So let's watch this clip. They've converged on Pinktree. They've met Gil, who is a former member of the troupe. But all of this is really in order for Kirsten to get to this book, which she's starting to guess is being used
No, she's already found
as a Bible.
She's already gotten the book out of his office earlier in the episode, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's happened, and now, of course, the prophet reveals his true menace, and I guess we find out later, maybe not, because we have to somehow be able to forgive this guy some of these horrors. So let's run the clip. Let's watch your fantastic filmmaking. Maybe you can tell us how you did it.
Okay.
You're in our room.
Hi. What are you wearing? What is that? Is that a mine?
They're beacons for the prophet.
Oh. Well, maybe you can show me.
Your friends are gonna start to disappear. First, Alex. The conductor, maybe? Who knows?
Penelope?
I'm not Penelope.
Okay.
He's wearing a bomb! Stop!
You know, I seem to remember a little girl who loved miniature golf. She loved it.
Gil, the kids have bombs!
Do you want to try? Show me. Came back.
Gil!
There is no before.
Okay.
Good fun.
Fabulous. So Sarah's playing a piece of music. Tell us about the building of that sequence, and about how you from this sort of well of empathy and sort of help, the occasional sort of fearful appearance of a bad guy, this sort of sudden horror emerges in the show. Tell us how you built that.
Well, I mean, okay, so Sarah's backstory is that she was a great pianist who could play La Campanella, which is one of the hardest pieces in the world to play. And since the trauma of the pandemic, she's been trying to play it, unable to play it. When she finally says goodbye to the man that she thought she loved and releases him, that opens something in her, and so she can sit down at the piano to play that. So that's just the back.
Which is a David Cross character, Gil, who
That's
of
right.
course killed at the end of the sequence.
And nature was wonderful because at that moment the heavens opened and it began to rain, and that just was like fantastic. Shoot the rain, shoot her playing the piano in the rain. So that's that. Lori Petty had spent 40, 50 days because she only worked, very few days in the first clump of time that she was there, but she had on Zoom learned how to play the piano and to play parts of that. So we had really worked on that in terms of which parts I needed to be able to put cameras on her hands and connect them to her face. So that was there.
Oh, it's her hands. It's all her.
There's nobody else there. That's all Lori. Then we had the staircase. My third day of shooting, I shot the part where they hit the bottom of the stairs and to the explosion. We were not going to be shooting upstairs in there, and it was a couple months before I shot all the rest of that. So it was, we found all of that, and then I knew that I wanted to compose shots that were hard edged and very cuttable for what we're doing. And it thrilled me that the spokes of the banister looked like keys, and I knew that I would overlay those things. So we had Daniel and I worked out a series of shots that we would do, knowing that in editing it would all be interspersed and then I shot the scene with David and his writing of the letter and so on. So in effect, it was a very, very simple thing to shoot. It was really just create these three elements, knowing I was going to intercut them, or we were going to intercut them, and just go for it. It's very good editing, I would say, and
yes, absolutely.
And
hats off to you. Hats off to your the editors of this show. Again, great, huge storytellers.
Yes, really.
With you.
And interestingly enough, they all worked on everything. They, on that episode, Yanni and Anna, episode 4, they were the titled editors of that. But as it went along, like there were these three editors, well, primarily Anna and David, but and Yanni did anyway. That had the same kind of communion and flow as did Jeremy and I, for example, when once the other episodes were done, we spoke and said, okay, it's you and me, babe. We're doing 5 hours of year 20. So there was a communion there. Not that we were in each other's, like, how are you going to shoot this or how are you going to shoot that, but simply with an understanding that we were doing these 5 hours. And does that, I don't know.
Yeah, 100%.
It sounds like we're comparing notes, and that was never like that. We would have conversations, but it was not on a technical level. I was the first to shoot in year 20, so I moved the camera differently than they were doing, and but coming back to similar, keeping it the same movie, but expanding the cinematic vernacular.
Absolutely, and with your extraordinary, with the extraordinary sort of additional wrinkle of three great DPs over the course of the show, there just seemed to be a real common understanding of the kind of and maybe an elasticity to the visual language. So,
right.
Jeremy, I'd like to open up the kind of the Scott Smith one would like us to get into it as well, but the. I don't have a sense of this being, of you having had to write a Bible with Patrick, or to sort of set up anything that was in sort of aggressively where visuals or any of the technique would be sort of front and center. I mean, the idea was to tell the story, and the story is so powerful that in a way it seems to pull these elements in. Nonetheless,
Well,
there's
I should
an
say
unbelievable cohesion to it. So I'd like you
I-
to talk a little bit about how you did that.
In fact, I did have to do a little bit of a presentation for the network and the studio when we were contemplating year 20, because that wasn't part of the first 2 episodes that were shot. The first 2 episodes were all contemporary Chicago. And I think there was a little, not concern, but people were wondering, well, how is that language going to translate to this new world? And, how is it going to be the same but different? And I think that was a very important thing to demonstrate actually to everybody who was involved, how it was going to be the same but different. And so I did put together a little presentation actually that was visual and conceptual, and presented that to the studio and the network. And then everybody sort of sighed a little sigh of relief when they understood that, yes, there's a way to do this where it all feels like the same show, but it also expands the visual language of the show in a way that they were all really excited about. So
I never saw that.
you understood it intuitively. It wasn't really for you. You didn't need to see it.
It's for those guys, right? The big heads.
But yeah, no, I think it was a helpful tool for them to understand, and it was actually helpful for like the production designer and costume designer too, because it was it was like among the first things that were really sort of concrete from a directorial point of view of what that would look like. The production designer Ruth and the costume designer had done their own presentations and of what the traveling symphony would be and what the what locations would look like and all that kind of stuff. But this was a little more sort of broader in scope in terms of conceptual approach to things visually.
Well, Stephanie Morgenstern, no, I shouldn't out her, but was wondering if, and I am too, if there's any chance you would ever share this document publicly, if that's something that you would, you and your collaborators on the show would be willing to do.
Share the presentation.
Maybe.
Don't want to put you on the spot. Give it a thought.
Yeah, I will. I can't do it right now, but it's something to think about.
But just I'll leave it in your noodle. I'd like to sort of take. I want to get to the music as well, because again, the lyricism of the show is stunning, given the kind of ambient dread, the sense of kind of doom that comes with the very premise, but the humanity of the characters. I'd like to get back to the humanity of the conflict, your non-Manichaean treatment of kind of the bad guy, and the two sides of this sort of one Station 11. And I'd like to show the clip that kind of in a way resolves that, because these kids with these minds who are beacon carriers, one senses that they're members of in a way a cult, the David Koresh type, that the prophet Tyler leads. And yet Kirsten seems so willing to overlook that initial, what we've just seen in Helen's episode, this murder, in order to be in a conversation with this guy. And maybe she's so intrigued by the fact that he's got all the language of the graphic novel in him. And he seems so willing to kind of overlook the fact that she stabs him in episode 2, non-lethally, but only just. So I'd like to, just before we get into kind of, in a way, the reconciliation around the graphic novel in episode 10, in the I Remember Damage sequence, which I very helpfully also labeled to Ryan. I've got 2 clips labeled clip 2. If you could expand a little bit on how you managed to do this sort of genre show without, and carry the ambiguity of this titanic struggle all the way to the end.
I think the trick is really that it's not a genre show. We never approach it like a genre show. So yes, there's tension, and there's there are things that are scary that are, or there's the threat of things that are scary happening, but it sort of defies genre expectations in every way. And I think that one thing to understand, just what you were talking about with the preacher character Tyler, is that we're living, the post-pandemic world is actually characterized by, as well as all the beautiful things that we talked about, there is a violence in this post-pandemic world, and the red bandanas are like an example of that. We know that Kirsten herself has killed people. She talks about it. Especially in those earlier years of the pandemic, what's described is that there was a lot of upheaval in the world before things sort of settled into what they are now. And even now, there are still dangers out there. The prophet is still, potentially a danger. The red bandanas still exist; they're not completely gone. So, but this idea that an act of violence would it's taken in context in a world that's full of violence and full of threats. And so I think that's how you have to understand why Kirsten can relate to Tyler in a way, and the way Tyler can relate to Kirsten, even though she stabbed him. And it's like violence exists in this world because it's a complex, violent world, as well as being a beautiful world that's full of all kinds of creativity and other things. So I think it's that kind of acceptance of these kind of polarities of sometimes the world is violent, sometimes the world is fabulous, sometimes people make Shakespeare, and sometimes they kill each other. It's like, it's the world contains all these contradictions, and the characters live with those contradictions because they've had to for 20 years. And I think that's really what that's about.
Well, let's just before we watch the clip, Simon and in fact several other people have mentioned the hug and how important it is. So let me just slip that into your minds. Let's watch the clip that begins at 40:26 in episode 110. I Remember Damage. This is where Kirsten's decided to talk down in a way. What's her name? The young character.
Haley.
Say again.
Yeah.
Haley, who's converged on now the Museum of Civilization, along with a number of other kids, ostensibly to blow it up, and I'm going to guess at the behest of the prophet, unless he doesn't actually tell them what to do, which is what he claims. So let's watch it and we'll discuss it.
Great, Tim. Just let me know if this looks like the right one to you.
Yeah, it does.
Great.
I remember damage. Then escape. Then adrift in a stranger's galaxy for a long time. But I'm safe now. I found it again. My home. I have found you 9 times before, maybe 10. And I'll find you again. I find you because I know you, and I know you because we are the same. I have a job to do.
Good story. Love a good comeback.
I still have a job to do.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Fabulous. So, the hug also occurs in a variety of other scenes. Some, just before the birthing scene, and crucially, when young Kirsten sort of realizes that everybody's dead in episode 2. But let's take a look at this clip and tell us, what this is sort of designed to do, because the prophet's right in there in the edit. Most of our key characters are there, except notably Clark, but he has his own thing going. Talk us through this one.
Well, I think this is where the threads are coming together. This is towards the end of episode 10, and it's, Tyler's relationship with his mother is resolved. Alex, who's been thinking about leaving the troop, now it looks like she's going to probably join with Tyler and go away. the undersea kids who were a threat to the entire airport. There was a possibility they were going to blow it all up. Now they're, Haley, who's a representative of them, is sort of connecting with Kirsten and also understanding where Station 11 comes from, where the prophecy comes from. So it's all this. And then also we know that Jeevan is in the airport, and this little flash of Jeevan and Kirsten, which mirrors, Kirsten and this little girl, and Frank in the closet reading Station 11 with Kirsten when she's a kid. All these things are kind of coming together, and it feels like the past and the present are kind of merging in a way. And there's still more to go. Like there's still another 20 minutes or something of the episode, and many more things are going to happen, but it's all funneling towards this kind of connectedness. And you have Miranda's, we haven't seen Miranda since episode 3, and now Miranda's narrating this part of the story, and we're about to see Miranda again and go into and find out what happened to her. And that's the sort of like one of the last threads of this whole woven fabric coming together. So that's really what this is all about. This is about how things across time just kind of connect and reverberate against each other, and what they mean to each other. Like what we'll discover later is that if it wasn't for Miranda doing what she did, they would all be dead. This airport community wouldn't exist, because the Gitchigumi people would have got off that plane, they would have come into the airport. And if this didn't happen, then Jeevan and Kirsten would never meet each other again. And if that thing didn't happen, there's this kind of causality and this kind of sort of quirk of fate that brings all these things together. And that's really what this show is about. And Station 11 itself, this comic book, this graphic novel that only had she only printed 5 copies before the pandemic happened. Somehow that brings all of this together, and not just, the themes of the book are kind of really what the show is really about, but the book itself has this kind of unifying effect on everyone who it's touched. So it's a beautiful kind of, very satisfying, I think, coming together of everything.
And so many of these threads, I mean, starting with Miranda, she makes that book because she watched her whole family die, be electrocuted in the water in a hurricane. So a terrible thing happened, and she made a book. Right? A terrible thing happened when so they exploded the Museum of Civilization. Clark got terribly burned trying to save his dream, and because Clark was burned, they called the doctor. The doctor came, so like all this.
Out of trauma comes beauty.
So we meet. So Miranda reappears in episode 10. We've met her in virtually a standalone film in 103. Her journey is described linearly as the pandemic is hitting, where she's gone off to a business conference, and her last act is to save, and she knows she's doing it, everyone who managed to end up in this one airport, regional airport, now known as the Museum of Civilization. And we get to see her do it in episode 10. So talk about a very long arc. This is the kind of the beauty of I guess this kind of mini series filmmaking. Is that we live with this narrative for far longer than a movie would allow us. Here we are, just sort of spread out. Miranda's character, which is really going to cinch the whole thing together. Her piece of the story is told out of time, but in dramatic time, right at the end. So let's watch the clip, and then Jeremy, I'll get you to comment on it. So it's the last 110 clip. Don't let them out.
Lock the doors. Don't let them out.
Who?
Your passengers.
Why would I do that?
The people on that plane are dead already. They're all ghosts. So am I. So are you. But the people in that airport...
The people in here don't deserve to die like caged animals.
No. They don't deserve it. Everybody I loved and who loved me died right in front of me, Captain. A live wire came through our flooded home. I should have died too. But I was coloring up on the countertop, so I survived. The people in the airport.
They're on the countertop.
That's right, they're all up on the countertop now. Have you got family, Kip?
I do. A small one. My wife's not answering. Left a message.
What message did you leave?
I'd be home soon.
Well, folks, looks like it's gonna be a little longer.
They're all heroes
Okay.
on board.
I love that. The sequence we just didn't show, I love too, because of the exchange between Clark and Miles. But wow, beautiful. Daniel Deadweiler. Ooh,
Unbelievable.
I'm so glad we got through all that entire clip. You know, it's her last gift to other people, just as she knows she's not going to make it. So tell us a little bit about, you know, one thinks of that incredible scene in Handmaid's Tale where that you directed, where you know, the encounter between mother and child. I mean, these scenes, which are so simple in the filming, but so perfect compositionally, so well thought out, so unintrusive, and yet so supported by all the elements, including this beautiful music. But just a mountain of work, or maybe not, with the performers, so that this one moment can happen that's entirely transcendent. Tell us a little bit about your approach to scenes like this. And I know, Helen, you too have an enormous reputation for this kind of scene making.
Well, you know, we had Danielle for a very short number of days, and we shot her in the hotel room, her in the spaceship, her on the beach. But I think we shot the hotel room first. And, you know, Danielle is just such an unbelievable force of nature. Like, she's just the most transparent, beautiful actor. And, you know, she doesn't need a lot of direction. You know, there's always with these things, it's like, you know, how far do you go? And sometimes less and sometimes more. And, you know, but she's just, you know, so beautiful and so fantastic. So, you know, it's, you know, I was crying when we were filming it. Like, I mean, I think all of us were, like, just every take, she was just so incredible. And, you know, we knew we really had something special with her performance. Like, when we actually filmed the scene, I mean, it was beautiful in the writing. Like, I'm sure I cried when I read it the first time in the script too. But, you know, when she did it, it was just like, you know, it was almost unbearable. It was so heartbreaking. And it was just, you know, it was it was great from the get-go. So there's, I mean, really, there's nothing for a director to do except just not to screw it up. You know, you just have to kind of like let it happen and record it in the way it needs to be recorded and let it go. But then, you know, the crafting of the entire sequence was really, you know, in the cutting room was really beautiful too. Like it was, we had all these different elements, and there was a longer sequence actually on the space station, but it, you know, it seemed to want it to be briefer than it could have been. Like we had a longer version that was actually like was stunning too, but it was also, it didn't need to be that long. It just needed this kind of, this brevity really, I think, works really, really well for the whole thing. And it's very emotional, and it doesn't overplay the emotion. It just is effortlessly emotional. And there's something, it's emotional because of a lot of things. It's her performance, but it's also that, you know, at this point in the story, we've lived with these characters for so long. We've lived with Station 11 as the graphic novel for so long. And here, you know, Miranda is in Station 11. She's in her comic book, her creation. And there's something so satisfying about that, like seeing the graphic novel come to life and her being in it. It's such a beautiful poetic idea. And then this idea that she's going home, which is such a huge idea in this show about people going home or finding home or what is home. And, you know, just when she dies, she goes home. That's what it is. She goes back to the Caribbean, and she's back in the sand. And it's like, you know, she's in her art, but she's also in her home. And it's, you know, it's a very poetic way of looking at, you know, somebody's passing. And I think it's incredibly moving. And I don't know, it's just,
it really is. I want to get to a question that Vipa von Keresfeld you know, has highlighted. And by the way, everyone, I've been reading the questions and attempting to distill them into a question. Great questions. Thank you so much for your participation. Just before we do, though, I'd like you to comment on Hugo, our pilot, and the chat playing that part. I guess he's not an actor.
Well, he's sort of an actor, but he's also a pilot. And I think that was the, you know,
did a beautiful job.
Yeah, one of the great things about casting him was that he, not that he ever had to fly in the show, but the fact that he was a pilot somehow resonated nicely in the way that so many things in the show just kind of reverberate in all kinds of ways that are interesting. And he just kind of knocked it out of the park. Like he's just so simple. And when he actually came for the scenes that we shot with Miranda talking to him on the phone, we shot that first before we shot him on the airplane. And so I didn't really know how he would be with her or what their chemistry would be like. But as soon as we did the first take where he's off camera reading to her, and he was physically in the hotel room set where we were, he was just off camera reading to her, you know, so she had the proper performance to respond to. He was just so lovely and so unaffected and human, and I don't know, just really moving, that, you know, the two of them together is just like, oh God, it was just heartbreaking to watch.
And I have to commend you. Absolutely, it's heartbreaking. And I have to commend you and also note how deeply moving the shot is of him saying, you know, taking his microphone to his to address the people in the plane, to tell them that they won't be leaving, that your choice to be at the back of the cockpit filming essentially over his back with a little bit of his profile with what appears to be perhaps a co-pilot, you know, unconscious co-pilot, or maybe not, maybe I'm dreaming, but this beautiful, really kind of a wide shot of this man, Hugo, at one of his most anguishing moments. Clearly it's Miranda's scene, so she, you know, is in close up, but to rely, to know that shot will do the work and not sort of be tempted to kind of go close on him or somehow milk it in any kind of classical sense. I really have to, on behalf of all of us, commend you for understanding or knowing how resonant that angle would be.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I think it's a big thing in this show to be really anti-melodrama. That was, I mean, it's so loaded emotionally, the entire thing. And that, you know, the way you get the emotion is by not forcing the emotion and letting the audience feel it rather than you telling them what to feel. And, you know, the context is so moving. You don't need to like hammer them over the head. And it's a similar kind of thing. Like, I don't know if you remember when Sarah dies, sorry, spoiler alert. she really dies. She takes her last breath in a huge wide shot of the room.
Yeah,
and
she just looks around, says something, and she's out.
And you hear this little sigh in this huge empty room, and it's heartbreaking. And it's just, I think it's just I don't know, maybe I have this kind of thing in me that is averse to melodrama, and I in my own work, and I like it. I enjoy melodrama as much as anyone, but in this did not call for that, and this is not the tone of the show, and that's not really the way I make things either.
And yet you're not fighting emotion. Let's talk about very briefly Dan Romer's music, which is lyrical and supports these scenes beautifully. There's no hammer in sight, but there's certainly a lot of support coming from the music. So could you tell us a little bit about the conversation that both of you must have had with Patrick and with Dan, or how that might have been, how that conversation may have occurred over the course of various episodes?
Well, Dan was such an integral part of the entire process. He didn't just score the show. He also did like the Traveling Symphony's music, the music for Hamlet. It's like all these things really came to life once we had a score. Like once I actually heard, Dan's Hamlet score before we shot any Hamlet. And suddenly it all made sense to me. Like I kind of knew what Hamlet had to be because I heard the music first. And, once I kind of knew the tone, that he had captured this tone so beautifully, I just knew we were in very sophisticated, beautiful hands. I should say, Dan did the movie Beasts of the Southern Wild. He's like an amazing composer. Like just
well, listen, I've worked with him twice, and I've worked with him twice. And
he's
I don't.
Oh, you don't know.
I know from the show that I was working on how brilliant he is, but it's not.
He's also the nicest guy in the world. He's lovely.
But you were in touch with him, and Helen, did you have a chance to have interaction with Dan?
Most of my interaction with Dan, I a little bit, but most of my interaction with Dan happened on a temp score, which is where and then so my conversations with Dan went through Patrick. Because Patrick, long after director's cuts were turned in, all the way to when it was absolutely finished, was sending me, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? I want to do this. Helen, we want to use your shot from the sandpit for the last shot, when we jump to the future at the end of episode 1. Is that okay? And I'm like, well, it's okay as long as the scene's still in 4. And a lot of that, as we know, is I don't, because I wasn't, in the end, I don't get to, in the structure of TV, which this was not, I don't get to say it, but the great thing was this conversation went on. So my conversation with Dan was not, it was done through what the temp music that I put into the cut, and then where it went from that, and then the conversations through Patrick. Truth be told, that's how that.
Which is a great reminder for all of us who toil in this trade that paying attention to your temp music is in fact a conversation with the composer, with the producers, with the writers. It's a wonderful way to share.
And I don't know how much it goes on at the moment, but. Because I haven't got my finger on the pulse, but I know that there was a little period of time where directors were working so close together that they were phoning in their edits, which is, I don't know, kind of breaks my heart. It's not in my, I don't have an understanding of that, of why you would ever get everything, do the underpainting, get all the, and then just, not.
I think it's evolving. It's so competitive now. I think we're finding that most of us are in with everything we can possibly offer at all times.
Yeah, and I think that's really important that you carry on as far as you can.
Well, listen, we're at the 1.5-hour mark. It tends to be our witching hour. Is there anything that you would like to share with us about the show or about the craft that I somehow haven't, beautifully sort of elicited from you with my incredible questions?
Well, I'll say one thing, which I think what was really special about this show, I think for all of us, is that I think all the directors on the show, which includes Helen and I and Hiro Murai and Lucy Cherniak, were really, really partners on this show. And it was really a unique experience in that way. It wasn't like we just directed episodes and left, or I would have stayed anyway as an EP, but I think, for Helen and Lucy and Hiro, and Hiro is also an EP, but we were all really, invested and contributed in very meaningful ways beyond what the normal title would suggest. And I think that was the spirit of the entire show, where actors contributed and department heads contributed in ways that were like beyond the normal contribution that you make to your department. It's like we were making this one grand vision together. And that's something that Patrick Somerville invited from everybody. And that was, and he handpicked everybody. We all handpicked everybody, so to have that kind of, communal experience of making the show together. And I think it was really a very special experience. And I really do think it shows on screen that it's
right. And it is one of the main ideas of the show, which is when survival is not sufficient, what we want, we can get if we make something together. And what an incredible thing it is that we get to make things together. And that's the whole, no one person makes a movie, unless you're animating and doing all the voices, I guess, writing, animating, doing all the voices and cutting it. It is such an amazing thing that we get to do as human beings, to come together and this organism forms and we make something together. My God, how lucky we are.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and the last 2 years were among the artists who have not been allowed to work. We've been allowed to work. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And
we've also served to demonstrate that if you practice protocols, you can stay safe while you do it.
Yes, absolutely. I guess it's just been such a privilege to speak with you about this process, to shine a light on a certain way that film can be made, even in this sort of massive enterprise of a series, and especially in that enterprise as the narrative gets to sort of, and the characters get to live and breathe laterally, even as the story charges forward. So thank you so much for walking us through the web that you spun. It was absolutely enlightening, and and congratulations on the show. So Hans, over to you.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. That you were great.
Well, thanks to all three of you. What a privilege it always is to spend time with the three of you, and what incredible work. Even just watching those scenes via Zoom is a journey. So thank you so much to all of you. Thanks so much, Tim, for guiding the conversation. To everybody watching, you'll be able to see this and all our amazing masterclasses on the DGC YouTube channel, as well as the podcast, the DGC podcast. So check it all out there. Thanks so much for spending this time with us. Really, really wonderful. Congratulations on the work, and looking forward to what's coming up next for all of you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Hans.
Thank you. Thanks, Hans.
Okay.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Tim.
See you, Helen. See you, Jeremy.
Bye.